welcome to a new episode of the Mid Post. The 2026 NBA offseason just got even more wild after yesterday's news that Jaylen Brown has been traded to the Philadelphia 76ers for Paul George, 2 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks. Wow. Okay, now first let me get the obvious thoughts out the way because I know it's still a very emotional day, especially for Celtics fans out there. And the Celtics just pushed Jaylen Brown out the door. I was very disappointed that Brad Stevens seemingly succumbed to the peer pressure, the media pressure, and even the fan pressure to trade him. I say this all the time. We as fans, the media, have a very good way of speaking things into existence in sports. We don't think we have a lot of power until we realize how much power our words have. And that's exactly what happened with Jaylen Brown. The noise just got way too loud, and the Celtics made an impulsive decision that is really affecting their franchise right now. I would have much rather Brad Stevens not fall to the impulse, not make a trade, and live with the outside noise that comes with keeping Jaylen Brown, then make a trade just because he feels like he should, not because he actually wants to. And because we still don't know what went on behind the scenes, at the end of the day, none of us were flies on his office door. Okay, none of us are a part of the Boston Celtics organization. It might not even be 100% on Brad Stevens. I hope there is a little bit of grace, for lack of a better term, in that regard, because it might have even just been Brad Stevens listening to his bosses, listening to the owners, and making a trade that helps them, not the basketball team, a group that may not care about what goes on the court, a group that is willing to sacrifice how the fan base is going to feel about it, but just what it does for their morale or their business or their pockets or what have you. So it could be some shady work going on that we as fans and even analysts or insiders cannot see. But at the end of the day, between the perception of Jaylen Brown being an outspoken African-American male athlete, this idea that his advanced stats automatically make him overrated, quote unquote, and Lord knows what else, this trade only solidified the inevitable, that Jaylen Brown was not going to be a Boston Celtic long term. And I know that hurts, but that's exactly what happened here. And additionally, when you look at the fact that the Boston Celtics passed on a trade for Giannis Antetokounmpo simply because they were not willing to include their young, fiery defender in Hugo Gonzalez in a trade, yet they allegedly settled for this kind of trade after the Sixers told them they weren't going to include VJ Edgecombe in the deal. That absolutely proves that the Celtics just wanted a reason to push Jaylen Brown out the door, not get the deal that was best for them. How easy it could have been for Brad Stevens. I'm gonna show you exactly how easy that call could have went down. Oh yeah, hello. Yes, Mr. I forget who's the new Sixers management now, but yes, sir. I would like to talk with you about a potential trade involving Paul George, but I want VJ Edgecombe if I'm going to give you Jaylen Brown. Oh, you don't want you don't want to give up VJ Edgecombe? Are you sure? Okay, well, no deal. That's it. That's all that should have happened. If you weren't going to pair Paul George with a future promising piece in VJ Edgecombe that could at least help boost that trade a little bit for Celtics fans and the organization, you shut that down every time. And then you move on to the next person. Okay, yeah, what's the Houston? What's the temperature on KD looking like? We're still trying to win now as the Boston Celtics, and he is somebody that is able to do that. We are concerned about his health, but this is Kevin Durant. Or who knows what other trades may have been out there. But I also understand Jaylen Brown's market allegedly it was hard for teams to make trades for him for whatever reason. Like I said, it could have been the on-court stuff. It could have been the contract. I don't know. It was just a lot going on. The Boston Celtics just came off a season where to most people, they overperformed. The initial thought was to tank, take a gap year, and go full throttle next season. But Jaylen Brown becomes an MVP candidate and they get 56 wins. If he was going to get traded, the return had to be mandatory, had to be a player that could keep them in championship contention, not 36-year-old Paul George. And as the cherry on top, They send Jaylen Brown to their division rival in the Philadelphia 76ers, who just came back from a 3-1 deficit in the playoffs against them. So now they quite possibly have to see them 4 times a year, and then maybe even more if they manage to qualify for the playoffs and face each other. So if we very well get a Sixers and Celtics playoff series again, I'd hope Jaylen Brown goes absolutely nuts, because that's exactly what's probably going to happen. If you are a Celtic fan, you have every right to be upset, frustrated, and confused. This is a franchise that plays with historic championship standards, and a trade like this ensures that they don't meet that championship standard. You know, it's funny, you in my experience too, I feel like the Celtics fans are, they're so stressed on this Paul George trade that they don't realize they can still be a good basketball team. But then I have to remind myself that it's the championship standard for a franchise that's used to championships. And mind you, a franchise, in fact, that has been a contender for much of the last 10 years now, and were always going to be as long as they had Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. So for a trade like this, yes, it is stressful for them. They were set up for success, longevity, the whole nine. But now they are in a bit of a pit stop, and dare I say, put themselves in position to have some rough or underwhelming seasons that they shouldn't be going through, all because they made this impulsive trade. Now that all of that is out the way, all that said, on this show, we focus on the courtside perspective. And I know the trade is still fresh if you are a Celtics fan, but we also have to discuss the reality. The reality that the Celtics have Paul George and the Sixers have Jaylen Brown. And that's what I really want to focus on today. So starting with the Boston Celtics, due to Paul George's age and recent injury history, the trade doesn't make sense. But schematically, the Celtics get an A grade here. You can give them an F in every other category: timing, longevity, contention status, whatever category you come up with. But as far as the scheme fit, Paul George is an excellent fit. If this trade was really about what I saw many Celtics fans saying during their playoff series versus the Sixers especially, then Paul George should be a great fit next to Jason Tatum. The notion was that maybe Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown step on each other's toes sometimes. Fair assessment. But bringing in Paul George, who can operate in the same spots as Brown, shoot a good volume of threes that fits their brand of basketball where they emphasize the three-point shot, take and make threes, somebody who can get open with off-ball screens, who doesn't just need isolation touches but can be used off-ball, play strong defense on the wing just like Jaylen Brown, a really good off-ball defender as well, something that has been a criticism of Jaylen Brown's game. He can score in the mid-range like Brown. He can rebound his position like Brown and look for teammates unselfishly. And because he is older, he won't be worried about taking over games in front of Jason Tatum. He's not where Jaylen Brown is in his career in terms of trying to pursue that peak level of basketball. He's past that. So he's not going to be trying to shine over Jason Tatum. This is really a hand-in-glove fit in that regard. Again, scheme fit. I do understand the simple fact that most fans who believed that felt like Jason Tatum was more so stepping on Jaylen Brown's toes than vice versa. So I can understand the frustration of putting Paul George alongside Tatum, who does carry the weakness of poor shot selection and the fact that he struggles to stay involved offensively when those shots are off. I know if you're a Celtics fan, I'm not even a Celtics fan like that, and I'm already cringing at the day where Paul George and Derek White shoot bad, because that's really going to be hard to come back from if you're the Celtics. Paul George is one of my guys, and I am such a fan. You know the saying, I love you enough to tell you the truth. That's how I feel about basketball. I am such a fan of certain players to where I can tell you the truth about his game. I'm not going to just sit up here and act like this was a great, great trade for the Celtics, because it wasn't. But there are some good things here that you can see just a slight smidgen of rationale of what the Celtics were doing. They just didn't necessarily bring somebody random in here. There is a scheme fit with Paul George. But my main point is that Derek White, Paul George, Jason Tatum, and now Mitchell Robinson, who's coming into the fold, is a solid defensive unit. The Celtics, so it's not just about the three-point shot, right? It's not just about having another scorer on the wing, but the Celtics don't lose their defensive identity. They don't lose an isolation capable scorer with a mid-range and post game, or like I said, their emphasis on three-point shooting by acquiring Paul George. If there is any silver lining you want to find, and I know it's not much, but if there is any silver lining, it's that. I know many Celtics fans don't have any interest in watching the Sixers unless they are playing against the Celtics. So while the concerns are very much valid, I also think there are just a lot of people who did not watch Paul George's defensive impact and offensive aid this year that are relying on narratives in the midst of their frustration with this trade. The scheme fit is definitely high. The major element, though, that concerns me about this trade is that the Celtics, they had established a dynamic with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum where they could not only fit together, but get staggered with the second unit. So no matter the game, Jaylen Brown could be the lone star with a certain lineup and play like an alpha. And Tatum could do the same. No matter what, you had a all NBA level player, an all-star, a superstar level player on the floor no matter what. That was the Boston Celtics cheat code. And unfortunately, they lose that dynamic by getting Paul George. 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, it would still be intact. But at 36 years old with his injury history, Paul George is not trying to carry lineups for an entire season anymore. He can do it on a random game versus a lottery team, or maybe a primetime TV game. He can do it for a playoff game or two, but not nearly as consistent as he could at his peak. And that is going to create more scenarios where Jason Tatum is going to have even less room for error when he's on the floor. Because Paul George is a great plug-and-play player, especially in this stage of his career. But if Joe Mazzulla's plan is to try to stagger him and Tatum the same way he did with Tatum and Brown, it's not going to be sustainable. It's not going to have the same effect. The Celtics have such a strong group of wings, especially defensively, in Tatum, George, Gonzalez, Jordan Walsh. And this might even allow the Celtics, it could be a blessing in disguise, it might allow the Celtics to better manage Paul George's wear and tear. Because the Sixers were so top heavy, they couldn't do that. But the Celtics have some bodies to work with, and that might actually help Paul George be a little bit more healthy. But offensively, Jason Tatum is going to be carrying a lot of that weight. If Paul George is still around his 16, 5, and 4 averages that he's had the last 2 seasons now, then somebody like Peyton Pritchard is really going to have to prove that he can step up as that secondary go-to scorer, which he absolutely has the skill set and shooting touch to do. Peyton Pritchard is an absolute baller, but that is putting a lot of faith in a player that tends to be better off the bench as a sixth man than he's often is as a starter. So again, the Celtics are putting a lot of faith in something that happened that might not happen. As great as it would be, probably not going to happen. Now, the Celtics, I want you to keep in mind, the Celtics can still trade Paul George straight up today or tomorrow if they wanted to. Of course, it would be very hard to find a team that wants to take on his contract, but if not, they'll have to wait till early September to try to trade him with more flexibility like cash and or draft picks. And that's going to be the next story to follow. At the end of the day, does Paul George want to be a Celtic, and do the Celtics want Paul George? But if the Celtics plan on riding with this unit, unfortunately, the flaws outweigh the silver linings. I tried my best to outline that, but again, the damage has been done and the flaws are there. They are capable of being a lower seeded playoff team. I hope Celtics fans know that, but I understand that's not the championship standard. Anything less than a championship is failure in their eyes. But, you know, between Paul George's health, Hack a Mitch Robinson strategy, sending him to the free throw line, right? And even his health isn't always the best. And just these other factors that can sneak up on the Celtics, that's just not going to be an easy feat to make the playoffs the way that it has been for the last decade. So what about the Sixers side of things? Well, I was on record of saying just this past season that they had the best four-man group in the entire NBA between Tyrese Maxey, Joel Embiid, Paul George, and VJ Edgecombe, because they were all players that could create for themselves, find teammates, and give strong effort in at least one area defensively. I said it before, Tyrese Maxey, to me, was the most improved defender in the NBA. He was an absolute pest in the passing lanes. He developed this knack to get chase down blocks and block shots on closeouts very well. Joel Embiid wasn't necessarily the interior defender that he was most of his prime, but still showed efforts on that end. Paul George, like I said, I outlined his defense before. VJ Edgecombe, I've shown him so much love of being a guy that one day can give you 30 points and hit a game winner or a dagger three, but then the next minute can get you 15, 5, and 5 and just be at the right places at the right time. It was such an incredible dynamic for those guys. So as you can imagine, swapping Paul George for Jaylen Brown takes that into an entirely greater level. But I do want to take the time to clear some details that I believe got a little bit lost in the midst of the high emotions post-trade. Because as of today, the Philadelphia 76ers are still very much stuck with a roster similar to what they had this season. After losing Quentin Grimes and Kelly Oubre in free agency now, outside of those four starters, their next most impactful players are Dominic Barlow, Dean Wade, and LeBaron Philon. And unfortunately, I fear this makeup is still going to require that the Sixers rely on about 6, maybe 7 players to win games, especially come playoff time. And as we know, that might get you past the first round. If you're really good, it might get you past the second round. But as we just saw with the 76ers, it absolutely became a problem the minute they got to the second round. They just did not have enough extended depth to hang with a team like the New York Knicks. Additionally, I saw some other chatter throughout the socials, this idea that Jaylen Brown is suddenly the third option after desiring to be a go-to guy. And I disagree. I would argue that Jaylen Brown is the second option for the Philadelphia 76ers and will be the first option in games where Joel Embiid doesn't play. Because at the end of the day, Tyrese Maxey knows he's a point guard. He knows his responsibility. And people didn't see this a lot because, again, the Sixers were only fully healthy for a handful of games. But if you actually watch those games, and he even showed this in the playoffs, Tyrese Maxey actually spent a lot of first halves and especially first quarters facilitating as opposed to scoring. He was feeding Embiid, finding PG if he was in a rhythm, and just letting the game come to him. But most games, there was either no Embiid or no PG, or sometimes even neither of those guys. So yes, Tyrese Maxey was absolutely focused on getting his buckets and making sure his team got off to strong starts. And being the lone point guard in the Sixers rotation, he was absolutely going to take his 20 plus shots per game and make sure he got his 38 points if it meant winning games. So if anything, I wholeheartedly believe that Tyrese Maxey is sitting at home excited that two of the best scorers in the NBA right now are his teammates now. The Sixers don't hesitate to play through Embiid early in games. We've seen this. He will get several consecutive touches before the team decides to move on from him or not, depending on his rhythm. And if you think Jaylen Brown, especially after the way this trade went down, especially after the season he just had, if you think he's going to sit back and go through the motions, I would like to think you are sadly mistaken. Jaylen Brown is going to do exactly what Paul George did and then some offensively. He's going to be locked in for 20 to 26 points a night. He's going to defend. He's going to step up when Joel Embiid is off or out of the game. And the thing about the Philadelphia 76ers is this. The Sixers generally run one of three actions. You're either going to see an Embiid mid or high post touch. You're either going to see a Tyrese Maxey pick and roll of any variety or a Paul George mid / high post touch. You sprinkle in some Iverson cuts that lead to threes or more pick and roll actions and some timely backdoor cuts from Kelly Oubre, and that was generally the Sixers offense in a half-court setting. Maxey is going to keep his foot on the gas for sure, but keep in mind, part of the reason he had a quiet series versus the New York Knicks is because he was facing the same issue Devin Booker was facing in the playoffs. When the primary facilitator and the scoring leader is the same player, defenses will gladly trap them and blitz every pick and roll because they would much rather see 15 points on 5 of 12 shooting and 9 assists than 30 points on 12 of 24 shooting. Especially in those games without Joel Embiid. When Tyrese Maxey was taken out of the game, the Sixers were done. So Jaylen Brown is also a great scheme fit for the Sixers and will allow Tyrese Maxey to breathe a sigh of relief. Not only does he breathe a sigh of relief because they drafted LeBaron Philon, but now they have Jaylen Brown. regardless of whether or not Embiid is on the floor. Also, making that Sixers starting unit even more dangerous than what we just saw this season. And that's still without mentioning some improvement that's bound to happen from VJ Edgecombe, whose development has decelerated just a little bit now that Jaylen Brown is in the mix, but nonetheless should absolutely build on a really strong rookie campaign, already becoming a solid all-around player. So obviously the Sixers have a lot more to look forward to than the Celtics do right now. But that said, they aren't totally in the clear either. Embiid's health remains a very important factor. If their second unit is still bottom tier in the league, their starters will once again be carrying a heavier load. And even though it looks as if a dynamic between Tyrese Maxey and VJ Edgecombe is still set in stone as the future of the Sixers franchise, that will be something to monitor as time goes on, because if Jaylen Brown decides he wants to be there long term, VJ Edgecombe could easily at some point demand a trade for a bigger role elsewhere, or even be sought after by other teams due to him possessing such a versatile skill set. Those players will always have good trade value because those players don't grow on trees, no matter if they're doing it on a superstar level, an all-star level, or a glue guy level. So overall, I believe the Celtics definitely made an impulsive decision here. The return that they got for Jaylen Brown ultimately shows how much they valued him, which wasn't much at all. And I say that with no disrespect to Paul George. Real ones know he's always been one of my favorite players all time. But I say that with full criticism towards the Celtics front office. This is going to take some time for them to clean up, if they can even do that, while hopefully not influencing Jason Tatum to start thinking about other situations himself, because that will be a whole nother doozy to deal with. As for the Sixers, presuming they will be healthier, they will once again be a strong team out east. But if they are going to remain top heavy only, I'm cautiously optimistic of their chances, because teams like the Knicks, who just won the title, the Raptors, now with Kawhi Leonard, will be right there with them, believing that they can do something special off the strength of their starting fives as well. So it'll definitely be fun to watch this season, but the Sixers should absolutely be looking to shore up that second unit, much like the Knicks just did, right? The Knicks knew, okay, we need a better bench. Our top-heavy starting five got us very far, but we need a bench. They get a better bench, they win the finals. That's what should be on the Sixers' minds if they're able to do it. You know, we see how that turned out for the Knicks. The Sixers should be following that same blueprint. So that's a wrap for today's episode. You know I had to come on and talk about the trade for Jaylen Brown that the Celtics just made. And if you've been following me for any lengthy amount of time throughout these past 5 years, you know when I say that this is a safe space, I genuinely mean that. So if you are a Celtics fan and just want to vent, this is a judge-free zone. If you are a Sixers fan and just want to celebrate, I got you too. And if you care more about how both teams will look on the court, maybe you're not as invested on either side, but you're just like, you know, how is this going to work on the court? You know, I'm definitely down to objectively discuss that as well. So as always, honest reviews and ratings on all podcast platforms are greatly appreciated. Please be sure to follow the socials at MidPostPod on Twitter and Instagram, at Desmond Powell _ on Twitter and Instagram as well, and TikTok. So you always have a way to stay connected with the show, whether that's through the podcast page or my personal pages. But no matter what, just know that at the end of the day, you can find me right here in the mid post next time. Peace out and God bless.